Oh, lots of smiling faces. Hi, good afternoon. It is an absolute privilege to be here, stood in front of you today. Lots of smiling faces, pleased to keep me going, as I am slightly nervous, as public speaking is not usually my thing. I've come to speak to you today about the other side of the coin, the perspective from somebody who's worked in the ambulance service for 5 years. It's often quite a perspective that can be missed out as those responding to medical emergencies, 999 calls within the communities. I've come to you today from East Midlands Ambulance Service, so it's our local ambulance service here. A little bit about us, we span over 5 counties, that's all the way up to Lincolnshire, Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire, Leicestershire, Leicester and Rutland, and also Northamptonshire. Last year, we made over 642,000 face-to-face responses as an ambulance service. That was about 1 call every 25 seconds. Just under 3,500 a day. That's why we all have grey hair and are generally quite tired. How are the ambulance service prepared to attend these types of incidents? So in cardiac arrest in specific, it's really interesting to hear the word paramedic used for anybody really in a green uniform. There's lots of different levels within the ambulance service, starting from emergency care assistant, or as we have in EMAS, an ambulance support crew, into technicians, emergency medical technicians, and then into paramedics and specialist paramedics or practitioners. Every frontline clinician that will make an ambulance response is trained to a level of basic life support as a core minimum, meaning that anybody in that green uniform, whether they're in patient transport service, non-emergency patient service, volunteer car drivers, and something I'm going to speak to you about in a second, community first responders, are all trained to deliver that vital CPR and defibrillation. My career within EMAS, wow, fresh-faced, young, youthful. In 2020, height of COVID, for some reason I thought I'll join the ambulance service. I joined as a county coordinator and training officer, working with our invaluable community first response team. The role of a community first responder, they are a lay person, they are a member of the public, somebody within their community that wants to take a stance against making sure that we get to a cardiac arrest as soon as possible and can do something about it. Make a stance for, not against. During my initial career within EMAS, I was trained at first response emergency care levels, which meant I'd got slightly enhanced care skills that I was able to give to patients on scene, and also worked as a peer-to-peer support network member, so colleagues looking after other colleagues. It's quite a traumatic job in some cases that we have, and I'd definitely like to talk about the support that is available within the ambulance service. I then didn't really see it as a promotion, it's more of just a sort of sideline, another role within the ambulance service to a station manager. So from managing our wonderful volunteers as community first responders and providing training within communities to those that wanted to get community public access defibrillators, those who were a little bit worried about performing CPR, into managing paramedics, technicians and emergency care assistants. I was lucky enough to be able to have the opportunity to complete my command training. So as an operational commander, I am able to go and attend major incidents and all the scary things in between. So that is a little bit about me. Youthful, fresh-faced, absolutely, I don't know what happened. I started as a community responder back in July 2018. Was qualified to a level 2 basic, which is I can do CPR, I can give some oxygen, and I can apply a defibrillator. I can support with issues such as breathing difficulties, chest pains, a basic level of response. No less than a month later, I was dispatched on my first solo shift, a cardiac arrest, as my first job. And I'd like to share my perspective with you all today. And whilst I'm reading, I've listed many of the emotions, feelings, considerations and thought processes that can go round our heads whilst we attend these types of incidents. You'll have to forgive me, it's the first time reading this out, so it is slightly scripted, but I will try and look up and smile at you as best I can. Looking back at this day, I get filled with mixed emotions. Just after 9:20 in the morning, I was mobilised to a cardiac arrest and informed CPR was in progress. I felt very nervous as this was the first time in my life I would have ever seen a person unconscious and not breathing. I wondered how the scene would feel on my arrival, how I was going to ensure I got the correct equipment from the car, how I was going to get there as safely and promptly as possible, considering at that point we don't drive on blue lights and sirens. How things would sound, would there be panic? How CPR on a real human would feel, because we know I'd have had enough practice on mannequins. How I'd start a process I'd been trained to do, starting with danger, checking for a response, moving on to airway, checking breathing, and I'd arrived. I got my bags out of the car, walked upstairs, and everyone in the room stopped for a moment. One of the members of the room looked relieved and said, "Oh, thank goodness you're here." And I turned over my shoulder, expecting a critical care paramedic, somebody from the HEM, somebody from the helicopter, but no, it was me. In somewhere south of 10 minutes, thanks to the actions of a community public access defibrillator, effective CPR, very basic airway management, we, and I stress we, as a team of care home staff, a very pale community first responder, and the arriving ambulance crew achieved a return of spontaneous circulation. In essence, the heart had restarted pumping oxygenated blood around the body, restoring a very basic level of function to breathing and consciousness. It's sadly not as plain and simple as receiving a shock and CPR and then being on your way. So this mix of emotions, my first initial thoughts on reflection were, am I happy? In essence, yes, because we are now giving this patient an opportunity to continue their life in whatever way possible. Am I finished? No. At the point the crew from EMAS had come up the stairs, there was some real relief within the room as the patient was attached to all of the monitoring equipment we use, stabilised and prepared for extrication to the waiting ambulance outside. I still didn't know how to process what had happened. When I was outside of the address, one of the paramedics informed me that the patient had re-entered cardiac arrest, but they were going to stabilise them again and transport them to the nearest hospital. Would I like to follow on to understand more about the next steps within this process? Dutifully, I got into my car, a manual drive car, and noticed I was unable to press my left foot down on the clutch. The adrenaline of this experience had got me. So I did what any person experiencing quite a number of new experiences in their life in a relatively short space of time would do, called my mum. I did. A quick call and reassurance meant I was on my way to the hospital. Sadly, the patient outcome was not as what anybody would have wanted, and they did pass away peacefully with their family next to them. A point that will always stay with me was the atmosphere in the resus room. It was on this occasion, and my learned colleagues would tell you it's often a busy situation in resus, incredibly calm. What in essence had happened was the efforts of the team of care home staff, that very pale community first responder, with an adrenaline-induced leg unable to drive a manual car, alongside the colleagues I am proud to now work with and manage, had sustained life just enough to ensure a dignified, family-involved end to that life. I received recognition for my actions during this cardiac arrest. I won't go into the specifics of the actions, as that would really take away from the fact that I learnt that day. Early recognition of cardiac arrest, a call for help, effective CPR, early defibrillation, alongside great post-incident care, cannot only increase the amount of survivors to this indiscriminate, horrible cardiac event. But it also, in some cases, can determine that life is sustained long enough to sometimes give the sad ending, one at least surrounded with family, love, care, and dignity. Thanks for listening to that. That is literally the first time I've ever really gone through it into some depth. Thank you. I'd like to just briefly share with you some outcomes, a bit of a factual focus here. I hope it does invoke some questions and experiences that when I finished and took a very large glass of G&T, I think it is, G&T over at the speakers table, we can have a chat about. And if you've got any questions as survivors and co-survivors, I'd love to have that chat with you. Remembering every incident can be different. Some expectations from an ambulance service, where we have a patient that is what we would call a time-critical transfer. That can be where a ROSC, so we've got them back, is achieved. Age and circumstance can often dictate that we need to get moving. We would call it a scoop and run. It will be a busy scene. Within a household environment, expect furniture to be moved. Staircases may need to be taken out. Crews will always take the time to discuss next steps. There will be so many questions, so many emotions. We will try to keep a hold of it. Outcomes can still change. We manage expectations of family, public, lots of different scenarios in which cardiac arrest can happen. I mean, lots of different ways of managing them. These are often always intense scenes where our priorities are to take the patient to definitive care, whether in Northamptonshire, and I don't know if this answers the lady's question from earlier about the nearest PPCI centre, whether that be to Kettering. Surprisingly, sometimes it may just be to the nearest hospital with a group of specialists to stabilise that patient, to then be able to transfer them on to that definitive care. Where scenes are incredibly busy, there may be a helicopter about to land with 2 more members of staff, a doctor, a critical care paramedic. It can be unlikely that relatives can travel in the ambulance whilst we are taking a patient into the hospital. It's all important things to bear in mind. Where patients are what we would refer to as a recognition of life extinct, where natural death occurs, where people die as part of a normal process, it will all start off very big, lights, sirens, bang, throw this, do this, do this, do this. At the point of us not being able to do anything, where natural death has taken its effect, where there isn't anything we can do, there are those occasions. That scene will calm so quickly. Our priorities then centre around respect and dignity. We would always have, even 5 years ago, I had a sort of on-the-job learning experience of a last office. It's a care after death, we refer to it now, but it's about making a patient presentable that has sadly passed away, to ensure that family that are arriving at that scene at least see their loved one in a dignified and respected state. Our clinicians' crews will always strive to be that first port of immediate support for any questions that people on scene, family, and remember these indiscriminate can happen in public places, may have. Some of the support available for our staff, we're really proud at EMAS to be able to have a P2P and PCW network. A P2P is a peer-to-peer. So mentioned earlier, I've been trained in the peer-to-peer network, and it is colleagues looking after colleagues. We all have shared experiences, we all have learnt experiences. We are all human. We feel things, we get upset, we get sad. So to lean on each other is really, really amazing. A PCW, a pastoral care worker, is a more spiritual outlook on the types of incidents we attend, certainly where death and trauma are within those. TRIM, Trauma Risk and Incident Management, it's a risk assessment that we use. It was coined from the Army in battlefield combat and post-traumatic stress disorder. We recognise that ambulance staff's mental health can fatigue over repeated exposure to critical incidents where death and trauma are at the centre of those. Myself as a station manager is in a really privileged position to get first look at when mental health and emotions are affected by those in the ambulance service. We are able to use a variety of non-EMAS external-led support networks such as the Ambulance Service Charity that have very recently opened up a crisis line for our staff to call that gives them access to regular daily check-ins and follow-up support moving on from serious incidents that have affected them. We also advocate the use of GPs, crisis teams, friends and families as well. Support available for relatives. Now, immediately, as I said to you, the probably easiest to reach is the paramedic there. What's going on? What's happened? Have you got any questions? What happens next is quite often one that we are asked. Where a death could be considered unexpected or suspicious, police will always attend these jobs to act on behalf of a coroner. And we also remember that undertakers and funeral directors are best placed to answer any questions about what does happen next. Sometimes it leaves people thinking, and I've heard a lot about it this morning, okay, it's happened with survivors, co-survivors, and those that have sadly not been able to survive. Then what happens? I'm really proud to tell you the ambulance service doesn't stop there. We have our patient advice and liaison service, part of our patient experience team. This team are amazing. In 2022, they worked through just over 1,315 public compliments, 125 complaints, because sometimes the service isn't what you guys feel that would be deserved, and we get it wrong. I'd be silly to stand here and say we never get it wrong. Of course we do, because we are human, thinking human factors. There were several patient stories which were also presented last year to our trust board meeting. These included patient reunion stories. And it's really, really interesting to think about a patient reunion in the sense that it might be something as a survivor you would love to do, to meet your crew, to have that opportunity. Sometimes, and being honest with you, a crew or a paramedic attending that job may not be able to fulfill that. It seems really bad, but in a way it's to protect their mental resilience, because we attend these jobs so frequently. Our PALS team are on hand to advise, guide and support you with your experience, whether it be good, bad or indifferent, and we ensure that your feedback reaches our staff across the trust. Thank you for listening. I would literally love to meet some of you, so please, if I make a quick exit off the stage, it would be great to have a catch up with some of you who have got any questions. But thank you so much for listening.